All right, so now we're on 15C. Again, we're still talking about industrialization and urbanization, but we want to look at how industrialization and urbanization impact women and children. We know that the impact on men, it's going to change the organization of businesses and their structures. It's going to change those who are in power. It's going to change how they look at the world and who's working in the factories. But a lot of times we forget to look at the impact that it has on women and children, and they are one fundamental piece of society. So we can't leave them out. We've got to see what this is doing to them. And if you haven't noticed yet, the background image is of industrialized Great Britain. And these are the smokestacks coming up, and they're everywhere, and the pollution is incredible. So let's move on. All right, so urbanization is one of your terms, okay? So you're going to see it here in purple. Remember, you got to write those down or do them on your vocab sheets. But urbanization is the movement of people from rural country areas to urban areas. Again, a rural area is like a farm, and an urban area is like a city. And I want you to look at the pictures. Women have been sitting at home. Oh, that's a poor way to put it. Women have been at home managing the household, raising the children, and doing all of those things. And now you see hundreds and thousands of women in factories working, long days, and then they still have to get home and take care of the children. And this is a picture of children that were in the coal mines. And because a lot of those mining tunnels were so small, adults couldn't get in, they had children go in there. And it was horrible. It causes breathing problems, respiratory issues. Lots of poisonous gases sometimes would leak out into those tunnels, and they're children. So the factory owners, the mine owners could find more children to hire if they lost several in the mines or if the tunnels had collapsed. All right, so the impact of urbanization on women. Yes, the yellow is what you need to have, and you need to pay attention to this. Middle-class women had a little bit more time on their hands. They would start out their lives, they would work a little bit, and then after a few short years, then they would find somebody to marry. If you didn't marry somebody, there was something wrong with you. And you were considered a pariah or an outcast in society. A good woman found a good husband to marry and to take care of her. That's how it worked during the late 1800s. And then once they found someone to marry, then they kind of, what it says is, conformed to social norms. They dressed well. They presented themselves well. They spoke in an articulate fashion. They did not interrupt when men were having their conversations. They did not interject their opinions because they didn't have the knowledge or the education to really understand what the men were talking about. And that's kind of there's a lot more about Victorian life in society, and you'll look at that when you get to later on in history, okay? But middle-class women could join reform movements. There's a great movie, go see Mary Poppins. Okay, the mom who joins the reform movement and is, shouting out and has a banner across her chest, and she's marching with her fellow women, and she comes home and manages the household, and she can do everything, and she always looks beautiful. But then you have your working class women. And because cities were so poorly built and dangerous, the women would get up, they would send the kids off probably to the factory or to the mines. They would go to work themselves. They would come home, and they would have to deal with these dangerous cities that didn't have good sanitation, a lot of good, clean running water. The wages were incredibly low. And because the cities were built so poorly, a lot of times buildings caught fire or they collapsed. So they were nicknamed Hell's Kitchen. The impact on children, okay, if you were a middle-class child, you typically got a good, solid education. You went to school for a good amount of time, and then, your education prepared you for what you were going to do later in life, and you typically followed in the footsteps of your father or your mother. And again, go back to Mary Poppins. It's a great, the father works at the bank, and he takes his son to the bank and wants him to put his money in the bank because the son's going to follow in his father's footsteps and be a banker. And, it's just the way things were done. And then your working class children, again, it's really hard for them to fight for good working conditions because There's a line of children out the door waiting to take your job if you fail or you die or you get fired. Okay, so, you had to have a job to earn some money to buy the food that you needed to eat or pay for the place you lived in. And you contributed to the family. So you worked in poor conditions in the factories. You worked sometimes 14 to 16 hours. You all go to school from 7:30 to almost 3:30, and that's, maybe 8 hours, if that. And you get a break. You get time in between classes to rest. You get to walk to your classes. You get time to go to lunch and to eat and to socialize. I know this time period, things are a little different with COVID, but think about it. You worked 14 to 16 hours a day. You barely got a break. Some died on the job. They lost their limbs. They had long-term health issues. And that's kind of the impact on women and children, and a lot of times we forget that. On families, well, the families that lived in the cities, you woke up in the morning, you all went your separate ways and went to your job. You didn't get to spend much time together because you worked such long hours. Your country family is almost the opposite. They all got up together. They all worked in the fields together. You spent more time together. You knew each other better. Okay, so just think about how that would impact you. Think about if you had to go through and you were part of an urban family during the Industrial Revolution or part of a country family and what that would mean for you.